I want to invite all kids ages 4 and up. If you want to come up here, I would love to tell you a story. So all kids ages 4 and up, come up under the platform. You'll be glad you came. So you come on up here, just take a seat, face the rocking chair here, and I want to tell you a little story, some things that might intrigue you a little bit. All right. Got all those kiddos? Any other kiddos want to come on up here? All right, I'm glad some more are coming. That's great. And you adults can listen in on this, okay? Yeah. Just want to make sure you're welcome to do that. So, I got a question for you kids. What is the right way of eating a candy cane? The straight end first or the crooked end? How many of you would say the right way to eat a candy cane is the straight end? Raise your hand. The straight end. Man, the vast majority. How many of you say the curved end? Curved end. Man, some of you eat it on both ends simultaneously, huh? That's impressive. Well, did you know, according to a national candy company, that 6 out of 10 people eat it on the long end? So you're in the majority there. And then 3 out of 10 eat it on the other end. Then about 1 out of every 10, they break it first before they eat it. How many want to break the candy cane before you eat it? One? Okay, couple. So I'll leave that up to you how to eat a candy cane, but I want to tell you the story of the candy cane. You know how the candy cane came about? Do you think it's been around since Jesus? It hasn't been. About 350 years ago, there was a choir master that led a kids' choir in a cathedral in Germany. And those kids just wouldn't be quiet and pay attention. Now, back then, if you didn't pay attention, you'd get a switch applied to you, like you'd get whacked. He had better ideas than that. He decided to make sweet candy sticks to incentivize being quiet, and it worked. But you know what happened? In the cathedral, there were some of the officials that thought it was inappropriate to have candy in the cathedral. So you know what this choir master did? He curved the end to make it look more like a shepherd's staff and look a little bit more religious, and they were okay with that. So that was the first candy cane, according to legend, 350 years ago. And then 170 years ago, guess what happened? The candy came to the United States of America. There was a fella in Ohio that decided, I'm going to take this candy cane. He had immigrated from Germany himself. He had this idea of candy cane, and he's the first one to start hanging the candy cane on what we now know as the Christmas tree. It was a spruce tree back then. So they hung that. He would start hanging these on there, put lights on it. And then it started catching like this trendiness. People started passing these out at Christmas time. And followers of Jesus saw this stick called the candy cane, and they decided they were going to run with some of the symbolism. First of all, you see the white? They said, the white stands for the purity of Jesus. Because he's pure. Jesus never sinned when he was on the earth. He's pure. And then it's hard. Like you can almost break your teeth on this. It's not made to just bite on. You got to suck on it a little bit, right? To soften it and really enjoy the peppermint. It's hard, but that represents Jesus being the solid rock that we can depend upon. And then you'll notice the J. Now, the J is the first letter of a special name. You want to tell me what that special name is? What is it? Charity? It's Jesus. But also, you can hold it this way, and it's a shepherd's staff, because Jesus is the good shepherd. But then there's one other aspect. Have I missed anything on this candy cane? Talk about the white, the hardness, the curve. Anything I've missed? Lena, what have I missed? The red. Now the red represents Jesus being scourged when he was on his way to the cross. There was shedding blood. There's no forgiveness. And so we look at the red, it reminds us of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross for us. Aren't you thankful for what Jesus did? So every time you look at a candy cane, you can remember that German choir master from 350 years ago. Then the first time it really appeared in America 170 years ago. And then the symbolism behind it with the white, the hardness, the J, and the red. Now, would you all like a candy cane yourself? I'm not talking like a little dinky candy cane. Would you like one this size? Okay, Miss Candy, if you quietly exit to my left here, Miss Candy has a stash of jumbo candy canes, and each of you can grab one. Go and make your way there, and then go to your parents, and save the candy cane till after the service. I think that candy cane will last each kid a little while, right? That's the goal. Well, if you have a Bible, I encourage you to turn over to Matthew chapter 1. Matthew chapter 1. I want to read just a verse here in a few moments, but this is Christmas Eve. It's very significant, and as followers of Jesus, we want to focus on Jesus himself. While we don't know exactly the time of year that he arrived, we still use this occasion to remember his arrival on earth, his becoming a man. How many of you are familiar with your family tree? I mean, like your grandparents, your great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents? Now, I only go back maybe about the third generation. Beyond that, I've never studied it, but some of you have gone to Ancestry.com and done some research, and you'd be familiar with your family tree. Now, for us Americans, it's not necessarily that big of a deal to find your family tree, but for the Jewish people, that was a big deal. Like, that gave somebody legitimacy. I'm from this tribe. I'm from this person's line. And so Matthew is going to introduce Jesus to the Jewish people. He doesn't start with his birth. He doesn't start with Jesus in a manger or even Jesus launching into ministry like Mark does in Mark chapter 1. He starts with Jesus' family tree to say, hey, this person named Jesus is legitimate. Look at where he came from. And I want to just read one verse this evening because I believe it lays down some significance. And it says in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, the book of the generation of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. In the next 16 verses, you see the word begat appear 39 times in just 16 verses. Not about you. I can be cruising through my Bible if I'm reading through my Bible, but there's always kind of a hang-up when you come to that word begat. Are you with me on that? And the genealogies and the family trees, it's like, why is this here? Well, let me give you 3 reasons why Matthew wrote this family tree. Because it's very down to earth as far as where we are and what we need. 3 insights from this family tree showing that Jesus is God's anointed one. Jesus is our way to God. Now, the first truth that really emerges in this family tree is that Jesus identifies with broken people. He doesn't identify with royalty, the kings out there. He identifies with broken people. You say, where do you get that? Well, there are 2 aspects of this family tree that show his identity with broken people. First of all, there are mostly men mentioned in this genealogy. But throughout all these begats, 39 of them, there are 4 names of women and another one mentioned as the wife of someone. And I just want to walk through those briefly because 4 of these 5 women referenced came from a very sketchy background at best. A background that even in our society and culture we would look down upon as a society. If you jump down to verse 3, you'll notice a name in there. It says Judas begat Phares and Zerah of Thamar. Now, you don't need to turn there, but in Genesis chapter 38, it describes a young woman named Tamar that so badly wanted to carry on the family name that she had married into, but her husband had died. She so badly wanted to carry on her family name, she prostituted herself to her former father-in-law and had a child through him. They say, that is, oh man, that is unspeakable. How could somebody do that? She's mentioned in the genealogy. You say, that's despicable. But Tamar's mentioned here to say God's going to use a person from a broken background to still carry on the lineage of Jesus. And if you even go down just another couple of verses to verse 5, it says, and Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. Rachab is the Greek equivalent. You say, what's the big deal about Rahab? Well, she was also a harlot that was in the city of Jericho. She was a pagan worshiping false gods, but she, in faith, housed the spies from the nation of Israel and then believed in the God that they declared to her. And after her city was taken by the nation of Israel, her life was spared, and she married in to the nation of Israel and became part of the lineage of Jesus. And then you fast forward just a few more words, and you have, and Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Ruth is another individual from a sketchy people called the Moabites. They were despised by the nation of Israel and even surrounding nations. They were known for their immorality, just their pagan worship. But yet she turned from her people to follow a woman named Naomi to become a worshiper of Jehovah God. She left that background, and then the wealthiest man in that town named Boaz married this poor Moabite woman, and she also became part of Jesus' family tree. But then if you fast forward a few more generations, you come to verse 6, and it mentions that David the king begat Solomon of her that had been the wife of Uriah. Now, this is the one black mark on David's life. He had an affair. He fell morally with a woman named Bathsheba. And even though her name is not mentioned, that's who is being referenced here. And it's saying that even David and Bathsheba, they had an affair together, and eventually they got it somewhat squared away through marriage and all that. God blessed him with a son named Solomon. And that was also part of Jesus' family tree. So do you see that Jesus in his family tree identifies with broken people? God used broken people to bring about the Son of God on earth. But then also there's another aspect here in this. Smack dab in the middle of this family tree is the exile. You can see that mentioned in verse 11. It talks about the people being carried away to Babylon. Do you know why God's people were carried away? Because they kept breaking God's law. They couldn't obey the one who had brought them out of Egypt. It showed their brokenness and their sinfulness and their waywardness from God. And even at the end in verse 17, it says, hey, here's 14 generations up to the exile and then 14 generations after the exile. The exile was the whole hinge point in this family tree, making it a big deal. The point is, Jesus identifies with broken people. Aren't you thankful for that? Another word to describe Jesus identifying with broken people is the word grace. Bestowing upon people better than they deserve. In October of 2018, tragedy hit a synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Robert Bauer, who had been posting anti-Semitic remarks in the months leading up to this point, came in loaded and began opening fire on Jewish attenders in this synagogue. And when he was finally wounded and arrested, there were 17 Jewish people that had passed from this life, another 6 wounded. As they took him to the hospital to treat his wounds, he was still yelling out his hatred for the Jewish people. But as he entered that hospital, the first 3 physicians to help treat Bauer were Jewish physicians, and they did their job still. And then as he was finally settled down in a hospital bed to try to recover from his wounds that he had received as police officers tried to restrain him, there was the president of the hospital, Jeffrey Cohen, who came in and checked on him personally to ask how he was doing. Dr. Cohen was also a Jewish man. Some of the attendants, after Dr. Cohen left that room, said, I could never do that. It's called grace. That's what Jesus has done for us. I know what you're thinking because I thought it too. I'm not like a Robert Bauer. I don't need that much grace. Now, by our standard, we don't need grace because we're good compared to our neighbor. We're good compared to our old friend who took the wayward path. We're good compared to that other person that's struggling, on the streets of downtown. We're good. But that's not the standard that God judges by. He judges by what we often refer to as the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. Now, I'm not going to go through all 10 of the 10 Commandments, but the first one is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Always put God number one in every aspect of your life. Let me ask you something. Have you always done that? I haven't. You know what that's called? Idolatry. So in God's eyes, that'd make us idolaters. But then you fast forward a few more and it says, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. Like even using God's name flippantly like we would in place of a 4-letter cuss word. Like when we hit our thumb with the hammer or when something doesn't go our way. God refers to that as blasphemy in his eyes. And then if you fast forward a little bit more, you see that there's a commandment that says, thou shalt not kill. Now, I'm not looking at a bunch of murders that have taken somebody's life physically, but Jesus came around in the New Testament and said, whoso shall say to his brother, thou fool, is in danger of hellfire. So if we even have a thought like, I wish that person was obliterated. Heart murder right there is what Jesus is saying. You fast forward to another couple of commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. Jesus came on the scene also and said, whosoever even looks on a woman to lust after has committed adultery already in his heart. Now, I realize this is kind of depressing, isn't it? But my point is, we are broken people. We fall short of God. We sin, myself included. And to try to cross from where we are to where God is like trying to cross the Pacific Ocean. You can jump maybe a little further than I can, but you're not going to make it. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. That's why Jesus came. That's why he's saying, I identify with broken people. Let me put it this way. He identifies with us by coming to earth because we need him desperately in our lives because of our brokenness. Now, the genealogy doesn't stop there. It's not just one and done. Jesus identifies with broken people, we're done. No, secondly, in verses 1 and 16, notice how Matthew is emphasizing that Jesus is our salvation. He's our salvation. This is the good part. Look at the names given to Jesus in verse 1. The book of the generation of Jesus Christ. Now, you've heard that term before. Jesus Christ. But that name is significant because the name Jesus comes from the Old Testament name Joshua, which comes from 2 Hebrew words meaning Jehovah saves. And so he's saying here in verse 1 is Jehovah saving is coming. But it doesn't just say Jesus, it also mentions the name Christ. What's Christ? It literally means the anointed one. What's the big deal about the anointed one? Well, the Old Testament Jews had always looked for their Messiah to come, the one who would be divine, the one who would deliver them, that special one that God would send. And so when he is introduced as Jehovah saves, Christ the anointed one, it's saying this is God's only way to salvation in God. This is the only way to have life in him. There's no other way other than this person that God has sent as his priceless gift to mankind. Jesus identifies with broken people, but Jesus is our salvation. It's interesting that the first individuals that heard this good news, they weren't a bunch of kings in the area of Jerusalem. They weren't the religious leaders. The first people that heard the news about the birth of Jesus as it happened were lowly shepherds in the fields, just watching over their flock by night, heavy-eyed, trying to stay awake, pulling the graveyard shift again. The sky burst forth with light, and there appeared to them an angelic host announcing to them in Luke chapter 2, verse 11, "For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord." That was good news, and it's good news for us because Jesus came to live a perfect sinless life, and then he died in our place. We're the ones who are the broken individuals, but Jesus was broken in our place by dying on the cross. Let me put it another way. We're the ones that deserve to be punished, but Jesus was punished on the cross to take our place and to remove that punishment that we deserve, being separated from God forever. And so the Bible promises that through Jesus we can have forgiveness, we can be clean before God, and even offers this gift of life with him forever. And not just life in him forever, life that starts when we believe in him and we become new people, new men, new women, new children. Jesus is our salvation. But then there's a third truth that I see just all over this family tree. Not only does Jesus identify with broken people, not only is Jesus our salvation, but notice thirdly, you can trust him. You can trust him. You say, where do you see this in the text? That's the whole point of Matthew in giving this family tree. He's saying, let me tell you who Jesus is. Here is a list of broken people. Look at the broken nation. They went off into exile because they couldn't follow God. Look at his name here, Jesus Christ, both in verse 1 and verse 16. Look at how he was announced to the shepherds and the lowly. He came through Mary, which was basically a peasant girl in Palestine in that day. Look at who he is. Therefore, I'm telling you, you can trust him. He is in the rightful line prophesied by the Old Testament prophets, including 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 16, and other prophecies. And therefore, this lines up with all of your sacred writings, Jewish people, is what he's saying. Hey, nation of Israel, listen to him. I realize I'm not talking to a bunch of Jews this evening. You're like, okay, big deal. But I'll tell you what you do trust. You trust somebody whose motives are sincere and they're competent. Like when somebody really cares about you and they're competent about what they do, you tend to trust them. Let me give you an idea of what I'm talking about. When I was in Rome about a month and a half ago, our first night there, we had lined up an Uber driver. Now, I'd already had a crazy taxi ride from the airport to our hotel, but I thought maybe Uber's a step up. And so we get in this nice van, nicely dressed Italian man, mid-30s, very sharp. He opens up the door, puts down a stool for us to even step in the van. I mean, just very hospitable. And we get in there. I'm in the back seat. He pulls out onto that main thoroughfare outside that hotel, and man, he guns it. And he clears, the vehicles on either side by what seems to be like 2 inches. And I'm hanging on the front seat then. Where in the world am I going here? My life is on the line with this guy I don't even know. I hope he has good reviews on Uber. Hope Brother Jason looked into this. And I'm just hanging on, thinking, what in the world is going on? And then I'm looking around, I'm realizing everybody's driving like this. And I'm looking at the vehicle here, and I'm like, okay. And he's looking back, he says, oh, are you guys doing okay? Oh, so he cares about us at least. That's a good thing. He cares about us, right? But then, as he's looking around, and he's just dodging traffic, and everybody else is doing this, I'm looking around and saying, I didn't see a single ding on this van. I didn't see a single scratch. There was no damage. And as I'm looking at all these other vehicles, there's no damage on their vehicles too. This is just how they drive. And he is competent. He's handling this just fine. Just close your eyes and trust, right? And that's the moral of the story when you're riding Uber in Italy. But the point is this, it took a little process to trust the Uber driver. When it comes to Jesus, it takes a little process sometimes to trust him, doesn't it? Because you need to realize 2 things this evening. When Jesus came, he was seeking your highest good. There weren't ulterior motives. He didn't come trying to use you as a tool. He didn't come just to claim you as his property. He He came because he was concerned about your brokenness. And he's competent in the fact, the truth, that he's the only one qualified who can do anything about it. Because you can't change yourself any more than a leopard can change his spots. But Jesus can come in and make a man, a woman, a boy, a girl new. You say, how does that happen? Acts 16:31 states it simply. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ and thou shalt be saved. Romans 10:13 puts it another way. For whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. It's this simple. When we come to the point where we acknowledge our brokenness, God, I've sinned, I've fallen short of you. And then secondly, we believe mentally, we realize that Jesus died in my place and he rose again the third day. And then we, of our own will, we turn from ourselves and believe Jesus and him alone to save us. That's the promise. We become new men, new women. We can have life with God forever. It's taken care of. We're secure according to the promises of Scripture. That's good news at Christmas time, isn't it, my friends? I'm thankful for that. But you can trust him. There's an African-American preacher from about half a century ago who nailed it in a sermon entitled, You Can Trust Him. I'm not going to re-preach the whole sermon because you need to get home and spend some time with family, but I want to quote just the last paragraph from S.M. Lockridge. Listen in as we go back in time about 50 years ago to the fire of this preacher. He said, he's the master of the mighty. He's the captain of the conquerors. He's the head of heroes. He's the leader of legislatures. He's the overseer of the overcomers. He's the governor of governors. He's the prince of princes. He's the king of kings. He's the lord of lords. You can trust him. There was nobody before him. There will be nobody after him. He has no predecessor. He'll have no successor. You can't impeach him. He's not going to resign. You can trust him. I got good news for you this evening on Christmas Eve. Regardless of where you are and where you've come from, regardless of your background, regardless of even your knowledge of the Scriptures, tonight you can trust Jesus and him alone to make you a new man, a new woman. That's the good news of Christmas.